Let's say you walked into a boardroom or walked into a meeting and where everything was urgent, right? Every department had a particular need, there was a deadline that mattered, and everybody worked so hard to accomplish to get the work done. But yet somehow it still felt overwhelming. Like there was a lot happening, a lot of noise going on around you. What I recognize is it's not only the busyness of what's going on in that room or department meeting that you're a part of. What could also happen is the overload of prioritization that's going on within that particular space. I know for me on the surface, when I see something like that or experience something like that, I think it's a workload problem, right? There's so much work happening and it's not balancing appropriately based upon the person on the team or the whole team itself, and becomes chaotic. Yes, that could be true. I also wonder if it could potentially be the leader not clearly distinguishing what really matters most in that moment, what can wait, who owns the work, and what success looks like. If we don't clearly distinguish those elements of what matters most, who owns it, what can wait or what can go, and what success looks like, then everybody then creates their own answers. They create their own narrative. And that narrative then may compete with another department's narrative or the organizational leader's narrative. That creates difficulty because there is no shared understanding of what success looks like across the board. And it doesn't create a shared priority because everybody has their own that they're trying to navigate and execute that is high and urgent for them. So in this particular situation, I was like, all right, there's got to be some understanding or research of how this impacts ourselves and our leadership and our team. Here's the first observation that challenged my assumption. For years, I've thought that workload was the biggest driver in stress. But what keeps showing up in the research is that there's a lot of ambiguity in our roles, that people just don't know what to expect. They don't know where to focus. And that makes me process and wonder how many of our teams aren't just overloaded by the amount of work that's happening, which could be true, but because there's just uncertainty about how to prioritize and work through that work. And this research comes from the Journal of Vocational Behavior, titled A Meta-Analytic Review of 60 Years of Role Stressor Research. So 60 years of people of these researchers looking at the work stressors, and they were like, yeah, folks are just walking around with ambiguity in how they see the work, and that stresses them out. And yeah, we can have a lot of work on our plates, but if we know how to place it and prioritize it appropriately, or being told this is important and this is not, then it just helps us out. But so we have to say, like, people are willing to work hard. People are willing to like engage and get active in the team, in the work that we assign them or that is assigned to them. But they got to know where they're going. They got to know how it looks within the greater scheme of the work. The second insight comes from Gallup. Gallup work out there that suggests that when managers consistently clarify priorities, the teams are more engaged and less likely to burn out. Okay? Think about that. If you as a leader are clearly prioritizing for the team will not feel burnt out. When that is not existent, there is a cognitive load that happens on them that has to make them do a whole bunch of mental gymnastics to identify and figure out and decipher what's going on organizationally that matters most and what matters most to them. And sometimes the loudest customer may be the most important thing, but if you're not the one that is redefining what that looks like, then they have to deal with the loud customer, with the CEO that's asking them to do something, with the old request that hasn't been touched in so many months, but there's a particular key performance indicator that's tied to that. There's a lot of moving factors, and they're continuing to feel that pressure in their minds and on their shoulders. If we become clear in our communication, it helps protect our staff and their well-being. As Brene Brown would say, clear is kind, and unclear is unkind. And you could be a kind leader by making sure you provide that clarity of what success and priorities look like within their space. The third observation is actually comes from the space of passive leadership. So there's an article from the Stress Health that does this research about passive leadership. In their large study of 2,467 U.S. workers, they found that passive leadership predicted higher role ambiguity, role conflict, and role overload. It shows me that when leaders don't provide direction, uncertainty grows. Think about it. If you're going to a city that you've never been before and never given like clear directions of how to get to your grandmama house, right? Like then you're like, okay, well then, do I take this freeway? Do I take that street? Do I, is that a one-way street? So you get so the ambiguity grows and the uncomfortableness also grows. It makes you uncertain in your ability to navigate, and it makes you uncertain in your own like skin, right? And you just don't really feel good. Think about that whenever you get a new task or you give a new task to your team, or or a new role is coming. Or a lot of turnover does occur in our organizational workplaces because we find that folks step into roles, and sure, if folks step into roles, and because the manager didn't set clear guidelines of what their role means, and they're like, well, why am I here? I can go someplace else where I know exactly what I'm doing and didn't do that effectively. In practice, somebody is always is filling the vacuum, is filling the void with some sort of substance. We don't, as human beings, we don't like quiet. We don't like to sit in silence all the time, so we always try to fill it with something, right? And this also happens in our workspaces when clarity is undefined. Sometimes it's the loudest voice that fills that void. Sometimes it's the person with the most strongest opinions, and sometimes so if you are the absent leader in that space that doesn't eliminate the influences that's creating that's happening within this vacuum, then it just amplifies, and then it gets redistributed to other areas. As I observed this one about passive leadership, the psychological fatigue and poor employee well-being are huge contributors to this particular stress. So as you are leading and you are avoiding providing any direction to your team, then you are empowering others or other influences to engage into that space. And that ambiguity continues to grow when they're supposed to be looking to you to answers, but you're not providing them, then they'll go find answers someplace else. I'm not saying this in a way that you necessarily need to have power from an egotistical way. That's not the case. What I do want to recognize is that as our role as organizational leaders, as those that people look up to with the type of influence that we have to be mindful of a type of the impact that our leadership has on our employees' well-being and what it does when there is lack of clarity in the role, in the work, in the directions that we're going towards. When that doesn't get identified and solidified, then again, it goes elsewhere. People will then decide on their own what's important. And then you have individual silos happening in the greater team. And then your power essentially to help influence all that disappears, no longer existent, because that vacuum has been filled with other influences and voices in that space that could have been affected and influenced by you by setting the order, and that then turns into other cultural issues such as employee burnout, workplace fatigue, tension between team members, because those clarification areas were not identified and solidified. In the reframe I want to provide, I'm not saying that you have to have all the answers. I'm not saying that. You don't need to have all the answers, and that's not what I mean when we say we need to practice this clarity. What it means is that we have to reduce any type of unnecessary uncertainty. In our leadership, we are deciding what needs our attention and what doesn't need our attention in this exact moment. We are deciding what direction we're going in and how we get there, or the ways that we can get there. Healthy leadership is creating those visible trade-offs that are going on within our teams and within our work's perspectives. And we have to poke our head up a little bit, see a little bit further to understand the impact of those trade-offs and how those trade-offs impact and affect the people that we're leading today. If we are not doing that, everything becomes a priority, then nothing becomes a priority. And if everything feels important, then nothing actually is. In each of these Under the Lens episodes, and actually every episode or every Engagement with Leaders lens, I don't necessarily just want to talk about these concepts and say, all right, cool, now go forth and conquer. No, we got to get specific. We got to talk about some applications, because we got to work to apply these concepts and not just hear what these things are, but actually do these things so that way we can effectively impact our teams for success. So here's your application for this week. I want you to look at one project that you're currently focusing on and working towards, or that your team is working on and working towards. And before you reach the next meeting, before you reach that next initiative, ask yourself these questions. Number one, what are we doing? Number two, why are we doing it? Number three, who owns this work? Number four, what does success look like? And the fifth bonus question, what are we intentionally choosing to not prioritize this week? That fifth one is a fantastic one because you can get through the 4 questions easily, but then you create a new problem where now you actually identify and provide clarity, but then that overwhelm still occurs because then it's like, okay, well then I feel like I need to accomplish all these things to get done. That needs to change. That fifth question alone can reduce an incredible amount of organizational noise that you and your team may be experiencing on a regular basis. And actually, I talk quite a bit about this in one of our latest newsletters titled When a Moment Needs Direction. And I could type that in the show notes as well, where I talk about some of these clarity aspects and the mental fatigue, but then what are these questions? Can you leverage these questions to execute within your leadership? So as I think about, the ambiguity that our teams experiences and how that relates to the organizational noise that they are also seeing because of all the priorities that they're feeling. The biggest shift that I recognize in my own leadership is knowing that I cannot remove every uncertainty. And honestly, I don't think my team really needs me to remove every uncertainty that they're experiencing. If I remove every uncertainty, then they just become cogs in the wheel and they're not critically thinking about how they can execute and leverage the work. That's not the case. What I can do, or what I think the team needs from me, is to simply reduce enough uncertainty so that way they can take the next step. Our leadership does not have the power to eliminate the fog at all that people are experiencing, but we can help clear the path or show them the direction that can help them continue to move through it with some handles, some guardrails, and some proper steps so that way they can execute knowing this is the direction that they're going towards. So this has been a segment of Under the Lens, part of the Leader's Lens show. And my goal is to help you as a mid-level leader lead well from the middle out, become the culture builder that doesn't just help people work hard, but help people see very clearly. And sometimes the greatest gift that you can give to your team is to simply help them what matters most right now. Follow me at Ray Devante on all social media platforms. Subscribe to the newsletter, subscribe to the podcast. Let me know what you think about this show. Continue to lead well with others, and I'll talk to y'all soon. Peace.